The morning air in the small roadside diner was thick with the comforting smells of frying bacon and fresh coffee. Sunlight streamed through the large plate glass windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club, this was a rare moment of peace, a weekly ritual of quiet camaraderie before the road called to them again. They occupied their usual corner booth, a formidable island of black leather and weathered denim in a sea of pastel-colored formica. At the head of the table sat Ghost, the chapter president. His face was a roadmap of hard miles and harder decisions, but his eyes, a startlingly pale blue, were calm and observant. He sipped his black coffee, watching the mundane life of the town unfold outside. To his right was Reaper, the club's sergeant-at-arms, a man built like a commercial refrigerator who spoke so rarely that when he did, everyone listened. Across from them sat Doc, a former Navy corpsman whose hands, equally capable of fixing a carburetor or setting a broken bone, were wrapped around a warm mug. Next to him, Trace, the club's unofficial investigator, was quietly scrolling through his phone, his mind always working, always connecting unseen dots. They were a paradox, these men. Their appearance screamed danger from the roaring beasts of steel. They rode to the menacing skull patch on the back of their cuts. Yet here in Maria's diner, they were just customers. They were polite, tipped well, and never caused a lick of trouble. Maria, the diner's owner, had long ago learned to look past the leather and see the men beneath. She treated them with a gruff affection, knowing they were more honorable than half the suit-wearing businessmen who passed through her doors. The gentle bubble of normalcy was shattered without warning. The diner door flew open with such force that it slammed against the wall, the bell above it jangling in a frantic, panicked rhythm. Every head in the diner turned. A small boy, no older than 8, stood framed in the doorway, his chest heaving with ragged, desperate breaths. His hair was a mess, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to steal all the air from the room. For a heartbeat, the diner was frozen in a tableau of shock. Patrons held forks midway to their mouths. Maria froze with a coffee pot in her hand. The boy's gaze darted around the room, past the stunned faces, past the families and the truckers, until it landed on the corner booth. He saw the wall of leather and steel, the imposing figures who looked like they could stop a freight train. He saw strength. Without a second of hesitation, he ran. His small sneakers squeaked on the linoleum as he bolted directly for their table. He ignored the gasps and murmurs from the other patrons. He had a single desperate purpose. He skidded to a halt beside Ghost, his small hands gripping the edge of the table to keep from falling. Tears streamed down his face, cutting clean paths through the dust on his cheeks. "Please," he gasped, his voice a high-pitched plea that cut through the diner's stunned silence. He raised a trembling arm and pointed a small finger toward the window, towards the street outside. That man watches our house every night. He's trying to get my mom." The words hung in the air, heavy and horrifying. The other patrons looked at each other, then at the boy, then away. It was the kind of trouble nobody wanted. It was messy, complicated, and dangerous. They were witnesses, not participants. They sank back into their seats, trying to become invisible. Maria clutched her coffee pot, her face a mask of concern and helplessness. What could she do? Call the police? By the time they arrived, who knew what could happen? But the Iron Sentinels did not look away. They did not freeze. For them, the boy's desperate plea was not a problem to be avoided, but a summons to be answered. Ghost was already moving. He placed a large, calloused hand gently on the boy's trembling shoulder. The touch was surprisingly soft, a stark contrast to his rugged appearance. "Easy, son, we hear you," he said, his voice a low, calming rumble. Reaper was on his feet in a silent, fluid motion, his sheer size a promise of impending consequence. Doc and Trace rose with him, a unified force moving with practiced economy. The breakfast was forgotten. The peace was over. "Where, son?" Ghost asked again, his pale blue eyes focused entirely on the boy, lending him his strength. The boy, Leo, pointed again, more steadily this time. "There, the gray car, by the big oak tree. He's always there." Ghost glanced out the window and saw it, a nondescript sedan, perfectly positioned to offer a clear view of the small blue house across the street. It was the kind of car you would never notice, which was precisely the point. He gave a short, sharp nod to his men. Without another word, they moved. They walked out of the diner not with aggression, but with a chilling, deliberate purpose. The other patrons watched them go, a mixture of fear and awe on their faces. They were watching a force of nature being unleashed. As the four bikers crossed the street, a man got out of the sedan. He was the antithesis of the men approaching him. He was of average height and build, dressed in clean khakis and a light blue polo shirt. He had neatly combed hair and a smile that seemed practiced for parent-teacher conferences. He looked respectable. He looked safe. He looked like the kind of man you'd trust with your children. He watched the bikers approach, his friendly smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before he plastered it back on, a shield of feigned confidence. This was Mr. Harrison, Leo's school guidance counselor. He clearly believed his professional standing made him untouchable. Ghost stopped a few feet from him, the other three sentinels fanning out slightly, a silent, imposing semicircle. Reaper stood like a mountain of granite. Doc had his arms crossed, his gaze analytical. Trace was already holding his phone, his thumb swiping across the screen. "You've been watching that house," Ghost stated. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. The quiet authority in his voice was more menacing than any shout could ever be. Harrison gave a short, condescending laugh. "I'm sorry, is there a problem here, gentlemen?" he asked, his tone dripping with false politeness. He gestured vaguely toward the diner where the boy was now standing in the doorway with Maria. "I'm Mark Harrison, Leo's school counselor. I was just checking in. His mother, Sarah, has been going through some difficulties. It's a very delicate family matter." He emphasized the word family, a clear attempt to signal that this was private business and they should move along. He was trying to use his perceived social standing as a weapon against the leather-clad men he saw as thugs. He underestimated them. Badly. Trace looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. "Mark Harrison," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Guidance counselor at Northwood Elementary. You live in Cedar Creek, 2 towns over. That's a long way from home to be checking in on a student, isn't it? Especially at this hour on a Saturday." Harrison's smile tightened at the edges. "I'm a dedicated professional. I go where I'm needed." "Is that why you were placed on administrative leave 3 weeks ago?" Trace continued, his eyes never leaving Harrison's. "Pending an internal investigation. Something about inappropriate conduct with a student's file. Accessing confidential parent information without cause." Every ounce of color drained from Harrison's face. The mask of the friendly, concerned counselor didn't just slip. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. The practiced smile vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian glare. His jaw clenched and a dark flush of anger crept up his neck. "You have no idea what you're getting into," he snarled, his voice a low, venomous hiss. He had dropped all pretense of civility. "That woman is unstable. She's feeding that boy lies. He's a compulsive liar. You should stay out of it before you get dragged into something you can't handle." Just as he spoke, the door of the small blue house flew open. A woman, Sarah, came running out, her face pale with fear. She had clearly seen the confrontation from her window. When she saw Harrison, she stopped dead in her tracks, a gasp of pure terror escaping her lips. Seeing her, Harrison's rage boiled over. He saw his control slipping, his carefully constructed world crumbling. "You see," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at her. "She's hysterical. She needs professional help." He took a step toward her, his face twisted into a mask of fury. He was going to confront her, intimidate her, regain his dominance. He didn't get a second step. Reaper, who had been silent and still as a statue, moved with a speed that was shocking for a man his size. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't need to. He simply stepped into Harrison's path, a solid, immovable object. He placed one huge, scarred hand flat on Harrison's chest and shoved. It was not a violent act so much as a simple physical statement of fact. Harrison flew backward as if he'd been hit by a car, the air exploding from his lungs in a whoosh. He slammed hard against the side of his sedan and slid down to the pavement, dazed and gasping for breath. He looked up at the giant looming over him, then at the other three bikers, all watching him with cold, dispassionate eyes. In that moment he understood. He was not dealing with thugs. He was dealing with judges, and they had already passed their sentence. Mark Harrison thought his respectable job and his clean-cut appearance gave him a free pass to terrorize a family. He believed his title made him superior, that it shielded him from the consequences of his predatory actions. He was wrong. If you believe that no one is above the law and that every single person deserves to feel safe and secure in their own home, take a moment right now. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who knows the importance of looking out for your neighbors. Now, let's see how the Iron Sentinels handle a wolf in sheep's clothing. While Reaper stood guard over the crumpled form of Harrison, Doc was already moving toward Sarah. She was shaking uncontrollably, her arms wrapped around herself, as if to hold herself together. Leo ran to her, burying his face in her side. Doc approached them slowly, his movements calm and non-threatening. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentle, "my name is Doc. You and your son are safe now. Just breathe with me, slow and steady." He began taking deep, exaggerated breaths, and after a moment, Sarah's ragged gasps began to match his rhythm. He knelt down to Leo's level. "You did good, kid," he said, giving the boy a small, reassuring smile. "You were brave, the bravest man I've seen all day." Leo looked up at him, his fear starting to be replaced by a flicker of awe. Ghost walked over and stood between the family and Harrison, creating a physical and symbolic barrier. He looked down at Sarah, his expression serious but kind. "He won't touch you again," he said, his voice a low rumble of absolute conviction. "Not today, not ever again." The certainty in his voice was more comforting than 1,000 empty platitudes. For the first time in weeks, a tiny seed of hope began to sprout in Sarah's heart. The wail of a siren grew in the distance, and soon a single patrol car pulled up. The local sheriff, a man named Brody, stepped out. He was a tall, lean man in his late 50s with a weary but honest face. He took in the scene at a glance. The 4 imposing bikers, the terrified mother and child, and the well-dressed man sitting on the pavement, looking disheveled and defeated. Sheriff Brody knew the Iron Sentinels. His first encounters with them years ago had been tense, colored by the stereotype of outlaw biker gangs. But over time, he had seen them in action. He'd seen them organize a toy drive for a children's hospital, seen them quietly fix the roof for an elderly widow, seen them stand guard at a funeral for a fallen veteran to block out protesters. He had learned that their code, while not written in any law book, was often stricter than the law itself. He walked over to Ghost. "Ghost," he said, his tone professional but with an undercurrent of respect. "Talk to me. What happened here?" Ghost didn't embellish. He didn't need to. "The boy came into the diner, said this man was stalking his family," he said, nodding toward Harrison. "We came out to talk to him. He got aggressive and made a move toward the mother. Reaper stopped him, that's all. Simple, factual, undeniable. Sheriff Brody nodded slowly, then turned his attention to Sarah. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Surrounded by the unshakable calm of the bikers, feeling the solid presence of Ghost nearby, something inside Sarah broke free. The fear that had kept her silent, that had made her doubt her own sanity, was finally overshadowed by a surge of protective anger. She found her voice, and the words came pouring out. "That man," she said, her voice trembling but growing stronger with every word, "is my son's guidance counselor. He started calling a few weeks ago, saying he was concerned about Leo's home environment. Then he started showing up, at the grocery store, at the park. He used his position at the school to get my work schedule, my personal information. He twisted things, made it sound like I was an unfit mother. He told me if I told anyone he'd have child services take Leo away. He made me feel so alone, so crazy." Her fragmented, terrified story became a clear, powerful testimony. Sheriff Brody listened intently, his expression hardening. He had heard stories like this before, stories of predators who used positions of trust as their hunting grounds. He walked over to Harrison, who was now sullenly pushing himself to his feet. "Mark Harrison, you're under arrest for stalking and harassment," Brody said, pulling out his handcuffs. As the cold steel clicked around his wrists, Harrison's last shred of composure snapped. He glared past the sheriff, his eyes locking onto Sarah and the bikers with pure, undiluted hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice raw with impotent rage. "You'll regret this, all of you. I have friends. I'll be out in a day." Ghost took a single step forward, his shadow falling over Harrison. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a sound more dangerous than any shout. "No, you won't," he said, the words as cold and hard as ice. "Because if you get out, we'll be waiting." The threat was not loud, but it was absolute. It carried the weight of a sacred vow. The color drained from Harrison's face again. He saw in Ghost's pale eyes that this was not an idle boast. It was a promise. Sheriff Brody pushed Harrison into the back of the patrol car without comment. He had heard Ghost, and he had no doubt the man meant every word. Later that day, the Iron Sentinels gathered at their clubhouse, a nondescript warehouse on the industrial edge of town. The air inside smelled of old leather, motor oil, and stale beer. It was their sanctuary, their fortress. An emergency meeting had been called. The club sat around a massive, scarred wooden table, the mood somber and serious. Ghost laid out the situation. A young prospect, eager but inexperienced, spoke up. "President," he said tentatively, "this could bring a lot of heat on the club. This guy's a school official. He probably does have connections. Are we sure we want to get this involved?" Before Ghost could answer, Reaper spoke. His voice was like gravel rumbling deep in the earth. The boy asked for help. It was all that needed to be said. The argument was over. Ghost looked around the table, meeting the eyes of every member. "This is what we do," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "This is who we are. We protect those who can't protect themselves. That is the law of this club." He turned to his officers. "Trace, I want you to dig. Find everything there is to know about Mark Harrison. Every complaint, every rumor, every skeleton in his closet. I want enough to bury him so deep he'll never see daylight again." Trace simply tapped his phone. "Already on it." "Reaper," Ghost continued, "organize a watch rotation. I want eyes on Sarah's house 24/7 until we know she's safe. 2-man teams, low profile. I don't want to scare her neighbors. I just want her to know we're there." Reaper gave a single solid nod. "Doc, you'll be our liaison. Check in with Sarah and Leo. Make sure they have what they need. Food, support, anything." Doc nodded. "Consider it done, Prez." The club mobilized with the quiet efficiency of a military unit. This was not a debate, it was a mission. They had been given a charge by a terrified 8-year-old boy, and they would not fail. News travels fast in a small town. Maria, the diner owner, became the primary source. She told everyone who would listen about what she had witnessed. The terrified boy, the immediate, decisive action of the bikers, the unmasking of the respectable man. The story spread like wildfire, transforming the town's perception of the Iron Sentinels. People who once crossed the street to avoid the rumbling procession of motorcycles now offered nods of respect. The fear of the unknown was replaced by gratitude for the known. Maria put a jar on the counter of the diner with a handwritten sign for Sarah and Leo. The jar filled up quickly. The town mechanic offered to service Sarah's car for free. The owner of the local grocery store dropped off bags of food at her house. The community, spurred by the bikers' example, began to rally around one of their own. Meanwhile, Trace's investigation was bearing fruit. Worked his network of contacts, old army buddies, information brokers, and even a few reformed hackers. He uncovered a disturbing pattern of behavior from Harrison, stretching back over a decade. There were other women, other single mothers he had targeted, using his position of trust. Most had been too scared, too intimidated, or too manipulated to come forward. Trace compiled a detailed dossier and handed it over to the club's lawyer, a sharp woman who owed the Sentinels a favor. Armed with this new evidence, the lawyer went to the district attorney. Harrison's bail was denied. The charges were upgraded. His friends and connections melted away, unwilling to be associated with the storm of accusations now swirling around him. He was trapped, his life of secret predation exposed to the harsh light of day. But the Sentinels knew that a legal solution was only part of the answer. A restraining order was just a piece of paper. A jail cell was not always permanent. They needed a permanent solution. Ghost called another meeting. "She can't stay here," he declared. "Even if he's locked up, the memory of him will haunt this place. She needs a fresh start." The club agreed. They pooled their resources. One of the members, a man named Tank, who ran a small but successful construction company, spoke up. "I've got a duplex I rent out over in Millwood. One side's coming open next month. It's hers. No rent for the first 6 months until she's on her feet, and I can give her a job in my office. Answering phones, handling payroll. It's steady work." The offer was accepted without hesitation. Within a week, the Iron Sentinels had moved Sarah and Leo to their new apartment in the next town over. They didn't just move their boxes, they set up a new life for them. They installed new locks, a security system, and made it clear to the local chapter in that town that Sarah and Leo were under the Iron Sentinels' protection. They were family now. A few weeks after the move, once things had settled, Sarah brought Leo to the Sentinels' clubhouse. She wanted to thank them properly. She looked like a different woman. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a quiet strength and deep gratitude. Leo, no longer a terrified child, walked with a confident bounce in his step, clutching something behind his back. She stood before Ghost and the assembled members, her heart full. I don't have the words," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me my life back. You gave my son his childhood back. I still don't understand. Why? We were strangers. Why would you do all of this for us?" The clubhouse grew quiet. Ghost gestured for her to follow him to a corner of the large room. The wall there was different from the rest. It was a place of reverence. On it hung a simple, polished wooden plaque, engraved with a handful of names. Below it was a collection of old, faded photographs. Ghost pointed to one of the names on the plaque. "Amelia," he said, his voice softer than Sarah had ever heard it, stripped of its presidential authority and filled with a profound, ancient sadness. "That was my sister." He pointed to a faded picture of a young woman with his same pale blue eyes, smiling brightly. "She was married to a man everyone loved," he continued, his gaze distant. "He was charming, successful, but behind closed doors he was a monster. She would call me, tell me things. I told her to leave. She was scared. Everyone told her she was exaggerating, that it was just a family matter and they were having a rough patch. One night he had a little too much to drink and he went too far." He paused, the silence in the room heavy with unspoken grief. "I was 19, stationed overseas. I was too young, too far away, and too helpless to do anything about it. I got the call from the Red Cross. By the time I got home, all I could do was go to her funeral." He looked away from the photo and met Sarah's eyes. "I stood at her grave and I swore to God and to her that I would never be helpless again, that I would never again stand by while someone suffered because they were too scared to fight back." He gestured to the other men in the room. "None of us here had it easy," he said. "Reaper grew up in the foster system, bounced from one bad place to another until he learned to be bigger and tougher than everyone else. Doc saw things as a corpsman that no person should ever see, things that made him vow to spend his life fixing what was broken. We all have our ghosts. This club, we built it on a promise to ourselves and to each other. We would be the ones who didn't look away." He looked her directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "Our code is simple," he stated, the authority returning to his voice. "We protect those who can't protect themselves, especially women and children. That's the law of this club. It's the only law that truly matters." A tear rolled down Sarah's cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of understanding, of profound, overwhelming gratitude. At that moment, Leo, who had been standing shyly behind his mother, stepped forward. He held out a piece of paper. It was a child's drawing, done in bright, bold crayon. It depicted a group of large, muscular figures wearing black vests with skulls on the back. They were standing in a protective line in front of a small blue house, shielding a woman and a little boy from a tall, dark, shadowy figure. Above the bikers, in a child's wobbly handwriting, were the words, "My guardian angels." Ghost took the drawing from Leo's small hands. He held it with a reverence that stunned Sarah. He looked at it for a long, silent moment, his weathered face softening in a way she had never seen. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. He looked from the drawing to the small boy who had made it. "Thank you, Leo," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "This is the best payment we've ever received." 1 year later. The scene is a bright, sunny park. Laughter fills the air. Leo, now 9 years old, is playing soccer with a group of friends, his movements free and joyous. Sarah sits on a nearby bench watching him. She's chatting with another mom, a genuine, easy smile on her face. She looks healthy, happy, and at peace. Her new job is going well. Her new apartment feels like home. The shadow of Mark Harrison is a distant memory, a ghost long since banished from her life. The scene shifts to the Iron Sentinels clubhouse. The atmosphere is the same, leather, oil, and brotherhood. But there is a new addition to the hallowed corner wall. Next to the club's official charter, in a simple but sturdy black frame, hangs Leo's crayon drawing. It has been given a place of honor, a sacred relic reminding them of their purpose. Ghost stands before it, nursing a bottle of beer. He looks at the drawing, then at a new large corkboard that has been mounted on the wall beside it. It's covered in handwritten notes, phone numbers, and scraps of paper. A note from an elderly man whose pension was stolen by a scammer. A plea from a teenage girl being bullied relentlessly at school. A request from a family whose son had fallen in with a bad crowd. Since helping Sarah and Leo, word had spread. The Iron Sentinels had become something more than a motorcycle club. They had become the town's unofficial guardians, the court of last resort for those the system had failed. They were the ones people called when they had nowhere else to turn. Sometimes the people society pushes to the margins are the only ones willing to stand on the front lines. They don't wear shining armor or flowing capes. They wear leather and ride steel, their hearts forged in fires most of us will never know. They are scarred, they are intimidating, and they are misunderstood. But they understand one simple, profound truth. True strength isn't about how hard you can hit, but about who you are willing to protect. Real heroes don't wait for permission to do what's right. They answer the calls for help that no one else hears. They stand in the gap, a wall of leather and resolve, and they hold the line.